Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this March 25th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Now, today, this is part 3 of a series of shows I'm doing regarding the persecution of the Tony Alamo Christian Ministry by state and federal authorities on behalf of the Vatican-led New World Order. Now, you're not going to hear that type of presentation anywhere on the mainstream news. You're not going to hear it anywhere on the alternative media, because this show, folks, is the alternative to the alternative. You know, you really have to peel away the onion today to get to the truth, and that comes from me, a journalist who worked first in the mainstream, then in the alternative, and found in both cases that you might as well just call them controlled opposition. Now, I took up the cause of the Tony Alamo ministry for one reason. I took it up, one, as a journalist to get the side of the other side of the story that's never told on the mainstream news, and secondly, because I was a law school graduate, and I believe he received a terrible defense and was subject to a kangaroo court and subject to basically a frame job. Not only on this case, but for over 40 years. They've been trying to put an end to the success of this ministry by spreading the gospel, by sending out millions and millions of pieces of literature regarding the Vatican's intent on behind the scenes of control in this government, as well as the history of the Vatican going all the way back to the Reformation, when back then, basically they used to behead and burn people if they read the Bible. Now it's a bit different. And the Alamo ministry tried to show that the Vatican has never changed in light of the fact that they have come out publicly with this ecumenical movement that's trying to gather everybody under the Mother Church, including Protestants who are falling for this charade, so to speak. So when I found out what was happening to Tony years ago, I started to check on it. And over the years, I've covered the story. Then in 2008, after he'd been on my show many times and talked about this harassment, talked about the upcoming possibility of what happened. I documented the raid on the first part of this show. That was in 2008. Then I talked yesterday about the children that have been taken from the Alamo ministry in an attempt to shut it down, and I referred to a civil case that was filed by some of the parents who lost their children and the Alamo ministries. And in that show, if you go back yesterday, you'll see some of the accomplishments that this ministry has, some of their accomplishments over the 40 years, and it's very obvious why the Vatican wanted to shut them down. First of all, anyone who crosses the Vatican line is considered by the mainstream or the alternative media as crazy. Secondly, if you have a large following and you're successful like this ministry, they're going to try to come down and shut you down, call you a cult, and do exactly what they are. Now, over the years, and especially since I think it's last July, I've covered this story in depth, and you can go back and go to my website. I'm putting up most of the shows now from the past months, and you can find them there as they're being put up monthly. And I wanted to do that for a case because what happens is people forget about this. And so I am constantly reminding people that this story exemplifies really the loss of freedom of religion and freedom of speech in this country. Now, on yesterday's show, this civil case that's been filed really documented, and I'm going to go back to it today in this third-part series, and I may continue this tomorrow if I don't get done what I want to today, but there's always another day, and I will continue on this story, because I told you it was a three-prong approach here. They had to discredit Tony Alamo, and two, that's obvious over the years what they've tried to do. Secondly, they had to disband this ministry. I mean, it wasn't good enough just to put him in jail. They had to figure out a way to stop the people that were passing out this information And I documented what they did yesterday on this show, what they were doing, and how they were getting across to millions of people across the world regarding gospel literature, which basically, the reason that it's important is that if you read the Bible, you don't need the Vatican. And you'll find that a lot of their traditions are pagan. And that's what they were trying to tell you. And any Bible reader would agree with that. But what I don't like, I go to a lot of churches just to listen to these Protestant churches, to listen to these pastors, and none of them will really get down to the truth, what's going on. And, they won't out the Vatican at all, because the Bibles have been sanitized. Yes. And if you start really researching what the Vatican has done to the Bibles, how they've changed a lot of things, how they've muted the real message that the Reformers back in the Reformation period tried to tell people about the Vatican being basically the seat of evil. And it is amazing when you start looking at this story. And one of the reasons why I got interested is because I lived in Rome for 6.5 to 7 years, and born a Catholic, went there without knowing any of this stuff back in the early 80s, and really firsthand saw a lot of what Tony Alamo and others in this country were telling people years ago, before really the internet even sprung up. So anyway, I wanted to let you know that I wanted you to hear his side, this side of the story, which you're never going to get. And as the evidence mounted it, as I did this, I saw a frame job. I saw how they were trying to dismantle this ministry in a three-prong approach. One, discredit Alamo. Two, take away the children of the ministry, which would disband all the parents, and that would really basically, if anybody read this story, what parent in their, was going to get involved now at this point, knowing they may lose their children. And three, then take away the property. So I got two. Before I get back to that case I was talking about yesterday, let me read a couple things from a parent that lost his children that I talked with, and I've talked to a number of them. And it's really a sad story, because many of them were bribed. Basically, they said, if you can lie about Tony and provide us some evidence, we'll give you back your kids tomorrow. Basically showing what they were really all about. Now, I'm going to present several things here. One, I'm going to present to you some information by a parent that lost their children. Not long, maybe 3 to 4 paragraphs of what I asked questions, and I got this response. And then secondly, I'm going to show you some behind-the-scenes information regarding the taking of their property. Not only was it involved in this criminal case that was filed against Tony, which had an offshoot of a civil case, of course, after that, which led to a $530 million settlement for some of these victims who admittedly at the end recanted. And if you looked at how they were put into custody to get this testimony and bribed and basically coerced, you see what a sham this was from the beginning. And I'm going to show you that the federal government had been trying to get this property for years prior to that and was successful based on other cases they filed, and I'll get to that. And then thirdly, I want to show you back in a real important part of the testimony in this civil case filed by some of the parents to show the unconstitutionality of the taking of their children and of the silencing of this ministry involving the First, Fourth, and 14th Amendments. And show you how the government really doesn't abide by the Constitution. So let's start right there with some information given by a parent. And he says, this is a Mr. Krantz. He says, you asked Greg if I had more information. Thank you so much for communicating with us. There are so few people that try and get this other side of the story. There is one piece of information I'm thinking of as I'm listening to you talk about the case and people being harassed and hounded to help convict Pastor Tony Alamo. I personally wasn't close to any of the females involved in the suit or the conviction, but I'm one of the parents who lost 6 children to that federal effort. the FBI agent Randall Harris, who headed the harassment and was actually coaching the prosecution witnesses at Pastor Alamo's trial. And I might add, the information I found, they've been coached long before this and taken into basically federal custody, put in some type of halfway house where they were coerced, and we went into that story, so go back to my shows. And Krantz says, was at just about all of my court hearings too, and there were many. Early on in my case, my lawyer, now listen to this, folks, approached me offering that if I would cooperate with the FBI, Mr. Harris, and help convict Pastor Alamo, that I would have my children back in 1 week. I had to refuse to cooperate, even though it was a hard decision. It must have been a hard decision for him, having known Pastor Alamo for over 35 years at the time, and knowing that he was being framed on false charges. This secret child court ran its course and terminated my parents' rights, even though there wasn't one shred of evidence that any of my 6 children had ever been abused in any way, shape, or form. Since the stealing of children by the Department of Human Services is a 2-step process, adjudication and termination, I had to appeal both processes to the Arkansas Supreme Court and then to the United States Supreme Court. That's 4 separate high court appeals. Both higher courts rubber-stamped the lower court's decision without addressing any of the merits of the issues appealed. Instead, they echoed the unsubstantiated accusations used in the lower court, which of course was echoed by the media. And, and there we go. Exactly what I'd been saying. And where do these orders come from? It's pretty easy. One court hides behind the other, and then we have the FBI working together. And we've had FBI informants who were hired to bring this ministry down and told us how, and named names of their authorities who told them, It just basically showed that they were trying to frame him. But were these agents, these undercover guys, ever allowed to testify in court? No. I used to wonder, says Mr. Krantz, how the German people could have suffered Hitler's slaughter of so many innocent Jews. But now it is very clear to me how it was done. And the courts and the media were very efficient tools to demonize the Jews, to the point that the general public hated them and believed they deserved to be exterminated. I see a parallel here too, folks. When people read the media accounts on this ministry, they're going to say, well, he deserved it. And I had combed newspapers, internet, everything to get as much as I can. And I get some of these Hollywood idiots like Matt Damon. Okay, he's a pretty decent actor, but he puts in his little blog, it's, something like, hey, I'm glad to see this guy in jail and he belongs right there, without even knowing what the case was about. Use your millions for something else. And he's probably a card-carrying Catholic, that's never going to look into the truth. And if he ever found it, he wouldn't do anything because he'd be afraid he'd never be able to make another movie again. And how much money do these people really need? So, then we looked at Oprah Winfrey picked up on the story. I mean, it goes to the level of, it's so obvious to me what they were trying to do here. And I've told people, if this could happen to these people, boy, it will happen to you someday if you don't stand up and at least acknowledge what's going on. I don't say, I told you on this show a long time ago, I'm not in the market of revolt or hiding away as a survivalist. I'm in the market of understanding this and talking about it with people so that people do get the idea. And with that, it's much stronger than the sword. And so don't allow them to bring you into this aspect of revolt because you'll lose in the end. And I don't want to see that happen to anybody. And revolt, in this case, look, there was no violence in the Alamo ministry. The only thing they really did was pass out too much literature and talk too much on the radio and get too many people to listen to what they were saying. And that to the Vatican was a crime, because in Vatican canon law, anybody that doesn't follow the Pope is considered a heretic, and any crimes against them aren't crimes, including jailing, including what they're doing here. This is nothing to, when they look at canon law, this is justified. And so now you know why the people of the Inquisition and the people in the 15th and 16th and 17th century hated this organization, and many of them fled here to get away from them. But, thanks to our good old beginnings of our country and the formation of America, and thanks to the complicity of many of the leaders back when our country was formed with the Vatican, they were allowed to enter. And you see how this Vatican cancer has grown if you really understand the truth. So Mr. Krantz says, I used to wonder how the German people could have suffered Hitler's slaughter of so many innocent Jews. But now it is very clear to me how it was done. Courts and the media, very efficient tools to demonize the Jews to the point that the general public hated them and believed they deserved to be exterminated. This, by the way, is very analogous to the process used to crucify Lord Jesus. Betrayal, false witnesses, corrupt judicial system, manipulation of the masses, murder. And he says, I hope this helps a bit. And Bert, it helps a lot, because it shows the real truth behind this case. And whether they don't succeed in court, I think if people really look behind the scenes, they'll see the truth too. And that's really more important, because we know what we're up against with this corrupt system that we live in. And, I've talked many times about how this story is very important, and that's really one of the reasons why I cover it, and why I'm writing a screenplay and also a stage play. Somebody yesterday said, why don't you use the title Remember the Alamo? And people would read it that way, but it's Remember the Alamo, and then put under that Ministries. And that's not a bad title. I'm thinking about it. But anyway, the screenplay is moving along well, and it'll remain. I'm going to try, once I'm finished with it, to get it done in a theater. And I know it's not going to appeal to Hollywood, because this idea that the Jews control Hollywood is completely ridiculous. If there's some Jews there, they're papal court Jews, and with the Vatican behind everything, that the money is there, and all you got to do is look back at some of the movies that have been out to really change the truth. Angels and Demons by Brown, and Tom Hanks, I think, was starring in that, along with Ron Howard was directing. Showed it was just completely opposite. They claimed that the Vatican was fighting the Illuminati, when I say many times the Vatican is the Illuminati, and that's the real crux. And those guys who made the movie got funded. They were in Rome talking to the cardinals, and much of it was shot on Vatican property. And the whole thing was designed to give you this idea that the church has been split, and there's this good and the bad, and the good side of the church has always been there. They haven't had anything. Of course, the low-level people are decent, and they don't know what's really going on. But these high-level people have never been any good. And they are the Illuminati. And that's the real shame of that movie. And shame on you, Tom Hanks and Ron Howard, with all your money. You can find, if you spend a couple days when you're not filming, researching the truth, you'll see that you presented the American people nothing but lies. And they paid well for it, though. And that was a very successful. You made a lot of money on it, though, didn't you? But anyway, that's the way the world turns. So anyway, I wanted to bring that to you. Got about 5 minutes in this first segment. And, I'm going to get to that complaint, because there's an information in that civil case, and Mr. Krantz referred to it in this statement to me, that I want to bring to you again today in the second half hour. But I did receive some information, because in the third part I've done shows on the taking of the church property, and it's kind of a story that I centered on basically the fact that because of the criminal trial, the defendants then filed a civil case and won the largest settlement in Arkansas history. Can you believe that? What about the Vatican? Why not take some of their You know how a double standard is here? If all the cases were adjudicated this way against priests around the world who have been, either convicted or hidden away for child abuse, pedophilia, whatever have you, even murder. I mean, we've documented that in the mission school stories in Canada and here. The Vatican then, all the children in Catholic schools would be in foster care or taken out. All of their property would have been taken away, and they wouldn't have one stitch of property, but they still remain the second largest property holder in New York. And that's just the tip of the iceberg if you look around the world, with their over 200 concordats. And look up what a concordat is, and really how they call themselves a religious organization is beyond me. I mean, even when Reagan, back in the 70s, reinstituted diplomatic relations with the Vatican after they'd been cut off since the killing of Lincoln, because our leaders back then knew the Vatican was involved, is a travesty. Lawsuits were filed by other church groups saying the Vatican's getting special privileges. Those cases never saw the light of day. So you wonder who controls the courts and who controls the behind-the-scenes activities of our government. It's pretty obvious. Now, I looked into this case regarding the taking of the church's property as the final straw. You know, they wanted it's a complete wipeout. However, I found it interesting. They're still functioning well. Under the circumstances. They still receive over 300,000 hits on their website every week. They still pass out a bunch of literature that they always did. They're still trying to maintain some kind of semblance of normality in the face of all of this. But behind the scenes, there's more to what they've been, as over the 40 years that they've been persecuted. This wasn't the first attempt at the taking of property. And I've gotten some really interesting information that shows you that this guy, Randall Harris, has been involved in this case since 1988 trying to bring this ministry down. This FBI guy who was at all the Bert Krantz hearings and basically was trying to orchestrate this whole thing. And then I saw how they been trying to take away this property long before and have been successful in taking much of the church property on other bogus cases. And I want to bring that up before I get back into that complaint. I've got about a minute, so let me not start it right now and then have to break off. So as soon as I come back, somebody remind me, tap me on the shoulder, that I'm going to start off with some of the property that has been taken by this ministry prior to this final criminal case that commenced with the raid in 2008 that I referred to in the first part several days ago on my show. And the reason, and I might add, the reason I want to put these shows together so that you can take 3 or 4 shows, and someone wants to put them on YouTube, so they asked me to do 3 or 4 shows together so they can just wrap this up kind of in a nutshell, because I've done many, many shows over the months, and maybe these shows will give impetus for people to look back at some of the other ones that go into more in depth on every aspect of this case. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal. Okay, let's get right back to this second half hour on the Investigative Journal here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And as I promised, I haven't forgotten. I'm going to get to this information that shows a little bit about how they've been trying to take away property from this church even prior to this criminal case and the civil trial that rendered the largest verdict in Arkansas state history, $530 million against this ministry. And let me preface it by saying this. Now, for those of you who don't know, I went to Catholic school, grade school and high school. And when I was in high school, there was a priest named Father Zell. He was our disciplinarian, who used to walk around with a paddle. And it was not uncommon that if one of the boys got out of hand, that you'd get a couple paddles over your butt. Now, knowing a number of people that had that happen, it didn't really, it was more of a message that words basically weren't good enough. And, I can remember one time that I wasn't paying attention in history class, and one of the priests, they wore the big Notre Dame ring, came by and just whacked me on the head to wake me up, and I had a little lump on my head. I went home and told my dad. My dad asked me why I told him about it, and although I was a football player and that didn't matter, he said, well, why did he do that? And I said, because I wasn't paying attention. He said, well, the next time I hope he cracks you right in the head. Gives you a good punch in the mouth or something. Basically my dad sticking up for the priest. And what I'm trying to get at is, I was born at the wrong time. Because, boy, I probably could have owned that church and all of their property if the same standards were used that they use against the Tony Alamo ministry. Right. Now, knowing a number of my friends who were paddled, which, it didn't really bother, it wasn't like a severe beating, it wasn't like the Inquisition tortures. It was basically a message. And back then, those messages were common. So just using that as an example, I found out that some property, much of the property was taken, a lot of property was taken away over similar circumstances. And this was prior to Tony's criminal case. Now, they've lost almost all of their property. The state is systematically at this point trying to take it all. Pennies on the dollar, and I wonder who's going to get that. Probably it'll end up being a Catholic church or something, or an orphanage, Catholic orphanage, where they can conduct some of their guinea pig testing that we've proven they've done in the past, working together with the state. Now, due to a civil case of two young men they won basically $66 million, reduced to 33, for two paddlings for one, and 3 for other, over a period of, when they were at the church, that occurred between 12 and 18 years of age. Boy, I tell you, I got a couple of paddles from Father Zell, probably similar. These weren't like, beatings. These were like messages with a paddle. Hey, you're screwing around. And that was worth 33 mil. My God, if I would have got together with all my friends, we could have owned that whole Notre Dame High School and probably part of the university. But that's a news story. That's a story I haven't gotten into, and I got to get more information on that. But it all ties together, folks. Randall Harris, the head of the FBI agent on Tony's case since 1988, when he was released from prison on bogus IRS charges, immediately, met the two boys at the airport the morning they were leaving the church. Now, he said they were watching them as they left for protection, of course. They were immediately approached, interviewed, and persuaded to be used by FBI and state police agents. Now, it's interesting, though, that according to people that were at the ministry, these two guys never had any grudges towards the church when they left. One left due to his older sister's contact, I heard, and encouragement to leave, which he eventually did. And the other left to run after the girl he had a crush on. He claimed he was to marry her and come back to the church and raise his family there. This was a well-known fact. Now, if he's then these guys are approached, if someone would approach me, let's say I was coming home from school, And some guy, the FBI comes over and talks and says, hey, listen, if you cooperate with us, who paddled you today? And how bad? Well, I got hit on the butt. I don't, no bruises, just got hit on the butt. Well, if you cooperate with us, we'll help you file a lawsuit again, and you can win a lot of money. And think about it, what your family may need it. You got a young little brother who needs it. Wow, coercion right there. Now, I found out that time shortly after Tony's arrest, their superzealous attorneys teamed up with them. Yeah. The attorney David Carter is quoted as saying he was going to, quote, tear the roof off of every one of the church properties. And he had a good old buddy, Judge Bryant, all working together, ignored all of the church members' claims to the properties and agreed with them that Tony Alamo was the true owner, so they could take the property away. Now, Bryant was also the magistrate, so these guys have been around a while, over Tony's 2255 appeal, which was one of his appeals, which I've gone over on this show, regarding the frame job in his criminal trial. He was also the one to deny allowing Tony bond after his arrest in 2008. And, he presided over the boys' cases, Andrasik and Kalagna and other boys who were taken. Bryant would not allow, now this is interesting, any jury instructions to include the Arkansas law that states that paddling like this and this does not constitute abuse. And it's legal in Arkansas, but that wasn't allowed in. To me, it's just incredible. This is just a little slice of information to show you what was going on even prior to this criminal case. Now let's get back to the complaint that I've been reading and the case that was filed to show the unconstitutionality of the taking of these children and other things that went on to dismantle this ministry. In one part, in the allegations, they say that the defendants in this case were the Arkansas, the authorities behind the Human Services in Arkansas. They were said to have implemented bad faith unconstitutional policies carried out by agents, servants, and employees that was urged upon the Circuit Court of Miller County, Arkansas, regarding the individual case plans. When you look at these case plans for reunification of the children now in foster care, they're in foster care with parents who are church members. The parents were told they must abandon church-sponsored housing and secure secular employment outside the church in order to get their children back from the state. Now, this is such an unconstitutional policy. They're basically telling them how to live their life, how to worship. Where's the freedom of religion? How to work. Where's your freedom of movement? Where's your freedom of, there's none. It reminds me of Nazi Germany. Well, you do this, you do that. Big brother knows. This is such an unconstitutional policy, folks, that it smacks with it. That ordering this as a condition of parent-child reunification is clearly outside the jurisdiction of any court, especially when there's no abuse. Now, why do they want to take them away? Because they want to dismantle this ministry. This requirement goes to the very heart of the constitutional violations, as church-sponsored housing and employment within the church is both critical and essential to the way the church members wish to practice their religious preference. The defendant's policy and practice goes far beyond the orders of a court. And the defendants, in this case, were now insisting that the parents sever all ties and associations with the church in order to regain custody. They're using their kids as a tool to dismantle this ministry, then take their property. Now, in this case, it states that in a case management meeting with two parents, Ms. Mitchell, the attorney for the department, and Ms. Smallwood, the caseworker for the department, told the parents that they should move to the Salvation Army, a homeless shelter, in order to get away from the church. and fulfill the case plan reunification requirement that the parent leave church-sponsored housing. This, to me, is completely absurd, ridiculous, when, in fact, the kids and the parents and everyone around was saying they're living a healthy, happy life. You know what they're told to do by the state? Go live in a homeless shelter, and then we'll get your kids back. So they obviously feel it's better that they live in a homeless shelter, dependent on the state, of course, a more taxpayer burden, than to live a healthy, happy life, working positively for Christ. That's what it boils down to. You know, and it's difficult to see how becoming homeless ever benefits children. And yet, other instances, a department employee of the defendant created a fraudulent series of Social Security numbers for parents and instructed them to use the numbers to secure employment, pay child support, and to use housing applications. Now, wait a minute. So this is going on behind the scenes. Somebody's giving them the authority. They're asking these parents to break the law, get phony Social Security numbers, collect phony child support, and collect money from the state in order to get their kids back. They're asking them to break the law to get their kids back. Now, what kind of an example is that? And there was no regard to the parents' potential criminal sanctions for Social Security fraud. Some of the parents who were given these numbers to use already had a legitimate number to begin with. Now, this is an interesting point, and we got to look at this one. If you think you've heard it all, wait till you hear this one. On April 7th, 2009, so we're looking after this raid. They've taken the kids away. Tony's in jail. They're trying to basically systematically dismantle this ministry. Beth Kenzel, Kenzel, an employee of the defendant. So she worked for the Department of Services, Social Service. I mean, these people, I don't know how they sleep at night, told Dr. Eve Cabas of the Hope Migrant Center that one of the church parents' children was not abused. And she said he is in foster care because the parents were living only on the Alamo property. That's all. Now, the assistant, someone by the name of Tony, the assistant to Dr. Cabas, overheard this conversation. Now, don't these actions and statements clearly show the true intent of the defendants? And I don't think I have to even say what that is, because it's kind of clear, isn't it? Now, if you're a judge, now I might add, I don't believe any of these people have been sanctioned. The judge never took any of this into consideration, I don't think. And if he did, why are many of the children still in foster care? Why are they still taking property from the ministry? And why haven't they ever given Tony's criminal case the proper review that it should have on appeal? Because basically this is a kangaroo system. And like I said in the past, if I was a kangaroo, I don't want even my name associated with it. So please change it, say all the kangaroos. It's worse than that. It's worse than a kangaroo court. Now, practices and policies of these defendants clearly, to me, shows the constitutional rights of the church and its members have been violated. And the church, this ministry, in both its individuals and representative capacity, holds a good faith belief that if the commandments of God are not obeyed, then the consequence of disobedience is the loss of the human soul and eternal life. So they've been asked to put God, the state, ahead of God. Now, I remember when this raid broke out, I wanted to, and I'd heard about much of the, in Falk, Arkansas, there was some laws. They didn't want them to pass out literature on their cars and things like that, so they tried to file a case, and they lost. The ministry won in a case where, they're allowed to put pamphlets on people's cars, just like, the car wash and everybody else does. But I wanted to see what average people thought about this ministry. And if they were affected, which I knew they would be by the media, so I remember calling randomly a number of businesses in that town, and I said, man, I'm a journalist. I heard about this Tony Alamo ministry. What do you think about it? Scathing. Oh, you wouldn't. It was like listening to CNN, listening to the news. They echoed exactly what the newspapers were saying. They're dangerous. Oh, really? They're passing out libelous information regarding the church, the Vatican. Oh, really? And it went on and on. So I understood exactly what the media was doing, and this was probably what was being echoed all over the country after the media splashed this story all over the place. Now, I think the requirement for a parent to leave his church and disavow his religious beliefs stands in direct contradiction with religious beliefs of its church and its members. The rejection of a long-held faith places the individual soul in eternal danger of punishment. Now, any Christian is going to believe that, but you know what? When push comes to shove, how many people are going to abide by it? And this is also, what many of the church members were faced with. And, if you think about it, this has a chilling effect on the free exercise of one's religious choice. And can you imagine if you were put in that position? And that's why I say there is no freedom of religion when it comes to criticizing the Vatican. And the rights, it's a chilling effect. And it's not justified for the state to use such a draconian formula of child reunification, and does not seek to justify a compelling state interest at all. But they think it does, because they want to shut these people down and shut them up. Because they basically, like I said, it gets down to a simple thesis. They do not want anyone, especially a successful ministry that has a lot of followers, to talk the way the reformers did in the Reformation about the Vatican. Basically, the truth. They don't want that anymore in this country. And slowly, our rights are being whittled away. And that's why it's important to look at this ministry and to see exactly what they're doing. Now, I've said a long time ago that if you really want to get to the truth, you're going to have to do a lot of research. You're going to have to go back into history. You're going to have to go back hundreds of years, thousands of years to get the real story and bring it to date. And what's real interesting is what's going on in the news today regarding, and when I say ISIS, you're going to know what it means, because that's the next big war they've planned for us. You're going to see that the Vatican has been behind this one too, some way, shape, or form. And I believe that this case will lead you in a direction, if you start researching, to the truth regarding a lot of major issues that you may be thinking about. Why are your rights being taken away in America? Why does it appear to be freedom of speech is declining? Why is there constant chaos? And I think if you look at it from that point of view, this case has a lot of importance. Now, back to this. I got a couple of minutes here, and I want to go back and see how much time I don't want to go over. Got about 4 minutes. Now, more information in this case. On March 30th, 2009, there was a Miss Mary Helen Mitchell, an employee of the defendants, which means she worked for the Social Services Department in Arkansas, told a church parent at a family staff meeting that he had to admit that he put his children in a dangerous situation by admitting child abuse, that he allowed his daughter to be sexually molested, and underage marriages were occurring in the church, in order to get his children back from foster care and out of dependency. even though he was being asked to lie, because this church member said, I've never seen none of this has really ever happened. What are you telling me? Now, this kind of requirement is clearly outside the boundary of any state order and originates in bad faith. And that's using legal language here. It's an unconstitutional policy. That's saying it nicely. I've got some real choice words I could use towards this woman that I can't air right now. But to force somebody to do that is completely. And do you think that ever got into the... Now, basically, a lot of this stuff should be admitted into really the criminal case to show that Tony didn't do these things. But no. They convicted him, and then they figured all the cards, falsely convicted, all the cards would then drop. Now, basically what they were doing at the Arkansas State was to create a situation, a policy, practice which completely contradicts the parents' religious and parental desires for their children. Prior to the children being taken into custody, the children were educated in a Christian-based curriculum that was Christ-centered and closely supervised. The children were either supervised and prohibited from watching many of the modern television programs and listen to some radio programs or attend certain movies the parents believed were inappropriate. They're getting some parental guidance here. The state didn't want to hear any of this stuff. Now they've been placed in state homes that aren't their parents' loving. It isn't a loving home to begin with. The old saying, a house is not a home. They were in a safe, secure environment. Now they were placed in foster homes that have no regard for these parental preferences. They were placed in homes where the adults smoke. The parents believe in this is injurious to their health. The children are exposed daily to all the trash that is spewed endlessly over the airwaves of modern television and radio. Children are exposed to graphic descriptions of sex and violence, just what the state wants, I guess. Prior to the state custody status, they were protected from these things by their parents because they were living in a Christian environment, which cannot be tolerated by the Vatican. But now the state wishes to introduce the children to this wonderful world of corruption, deceit, and crudity, right? Yes. And we could go on, and I will, with some other segments. I'm going to break it off here in a 3-part show, and look for these shows on my website. I'll continue in the weeks to come with more on this case. Hopefully it'll give you the impetus to look into this and into all the different things that the Vatican has been involved with. Have a good evening and good night.